On July 15th, 2017, 40-year-old Justine Damond was shot and killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota by Mohammad Noor, a Somali-American police officer, after she called 911 to report the possible assault of a woman in a back alleyway behind her house. This police killing has garnered a lot of attention because in this case, the killer cop is a black Muslim immigrant and the victim is a white Australian woman. Officer Noor was in the passenger seat of the squad car while his partner sat in the driver's seat, and it was his partner who said Noor was startled by a noise before shooting Justine Damond. Immediately, many in the community began wondering how this murder would be portrayed due to the race of the victim compared to how murders like this are typically portrayed in the corporate media when the victim is black. It always comes an analysis of the black victim's character, which is accompanied by a knee-jerk reaction to apologize for state murder. Questions about whether or not he or she had run-ins with the law, how threatening the black man looked, etc., etc., etc. The immediate fallout after the shooting, however, has produced a noticeably different outcome. For starters, it only took a week before 5-year MPD police chief Janae Hartu resigned, an action that didn't occur after previous fatal shootings of unarmed black men like Jamar Clark, for instance, who was shot and killed in 2015, leading to protests. The speed by which heads roll when the victim is a white woman really just continues to confirm what activists have been saying about the American criminal injustice system for many years now. That there is an ethnic value system placed on the lives of all Americans that compels people within the system to react differently to crimes depending on who the perpetrators and victims are. It doesn't end there, however. In a statement released on Friday, after former police chief Hartu's resignation, the mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges, stated that she'd lost confidence in the former police chief's ability to lead the city further. Now, would you look at that? You see how that works? When have you ever heard a mayor basically put political pressure on an acting police chief after a shooting? That is very uncommon and against the norm. Something else that is not common is how the mayor has called out Officer Noor and thrown him under the bus basically for not having his body cam on at the time of the shooting. A fact that she called, quote, unacceptable. Now, this of course is a true statement. It is unacceptable that agents of state and racial violence, whom I call ASVPs, basically killer cops, can turn body cams on and off at will while on duty when it is most convenient for them. Now, I'm critical of body cams as an overall solution. At best, they act as a deterrent, but in many cases, that hasn't mattered either. We've now seen enough instances of body cams being on during, an unjustified fatal shooting or an act of aggression just for the ASVP to still get off. At best, they make it impossible for the ASVPs and their lawyers to fabricate a story. But going back to what I was saying a second ago, how often do you see mayors throw cops under the bus days after a killing takes place? Almost never, right? What usually happens is the mayor works with police departments to give political cover to the officer involved in the shooting. In a recent interview, the mayor even admitted that race played a factor in her response. Here's the exact quote. She said, "Race has a role to play in all of this. I can't deny that. But in terms of my response, it's been about having learned the lessons from what people wanted me to learn from Jamar Clark's death, and me deploying those lessons every chance that I have, every way that I can be responsive to the community's needs when we face a tragedy like this." Oh, so now you've learned the lesson from the past. No, what she did was slip up and tell the truth. She wants us to believe race plays a role everywhere else, but not with her and her lightning-fast reaction to force the police chief into resignation. I wonder how long it would have taken her to learn the lessons of Jamar Clark if Justine Damond were black like Sandra Bland. You think she would have been so quick then? Would she have recalled the lesson with such ease? Let's just say that's highly unlikely, if not complete and total bullcrap. If it's not obvious to you right now that there's a two-tiered system of justice in this country, then it may never be obvious to you. The people who don't want to see a problem will come up with ways to excuse this too. Some folks refuse to believe that the criminal injustice system is littered with anti-black actors and attracts people who look to abuse their power because they know they'll be protected, especially if they're white. Now, there's one group that has been strangely silent throughout the course of this entire debacle. You want to take a guess at who I'm referring to? If you guessed Blue Lives Matter, then you'd be 100% correct. Where is the ready and waiting defense from the blue for Mohammad Noor? They're quick to blame the victim when the victim is black, but they've been unsurprisingly slow with this one. I say unsurprising because we know exactly why we haven't heard the same excuses. We haven't heard them because the race of the victim has now changed. It's not as easy to excuse an unjustified white murder for some of these apologists as it is for them to excuse an unjustified black murder. To them, when the victim is black, whether they be man, woman, or child, they always deserved it. If Tamir Rice hadn't been playing with a toy gun, he wouldn't have been shot. That's what they say. Let's not forget the chorus of excuses for the murders of Mike Brown and Freddie Gray. There is nothing that a black person can do to not deserve to be shot in these split-second moments when we are being accused of something for a lot of these folks. This only proves that they are driven by racism, not by justice, by power and authoritarianism, and not by liberty and equality. And racist organizations should be ignored and never allied with unless you want to answer for their bigotry. Which is why when you do build alliances, you build them with people of like mind, not people who are completely opposed to what you say you stand for 90% of the time. The enemy of my enemy is not my friend. I'll touch on this in my next video, where I'll add my 2 cents into this whole debate over the ridiculous idea about whether or not progressives should align ourselves with the alt-right. Based on what I just said, you should already have a clue of where I'm going to stand on that issue. I'm not just going to call out the silence from the non-existent quote-unquote organization Blue Lives Matter, which isn't really even an organization, but I also want to call out Michele Bachmann, who also exposed her bias in a very unapologetic way. At a gubernatorial event in Minnesota, Bachmann began rambling about how people in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is a town outside of Minneapolis, were becoming worried that the Somali population in the city was increasing too fast. She continued her loud dog whistles as she bemoaned the idea of people being afraid of being called racist and xenophobic, and that she wasn't afraid of it. She sounded very much like Dana Loesch, or Loesch, however you pronounce her name, from that NRA ad from a few weeks ago. She was buttering up her audience with the racial red meat that led right into the murder of Justine Damond. So now it's okay to be against police killings because it's part of the Somali invasion problem. Y'all see how that works. You see all of those Somali Muslims are getting their numbers up now, and people don't like it. So we have to do something about it. The implication being, if all of those Somali Muslims weren't in Minneapolis and the surrounding areas, that poor white woman wouldn't have been shot because, you know, the white officers don't shoot us, wink, wink, wink. But she didn't stop there. The dog whistles were screeching when she called Mohammad Noor a quote, affirmative action hire by the quote, hijab-wearing mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges. What? Those aren't dog whistles. Those aren't whistles. Michele Bachmann barked those racist comments. Of course, I don't mean that literally, but figuratively. Those were the words from a woman on a mission she'd only go on for Justine Damond, not Rekia Boyd or the aforementioned Sandra Bland. You never hear right-winger diminish the image of an ASRV in public the way Michele Bachmann did when it came to Mohammad Noor's image. You see, people like Bachmann don't see the Mohammad Noors of the nation as their fellow Americans. It's as simple as that. That's why she's so quick to otherize him. He's not an American, he's a Somali American. He's an immigrant, not a quote-unquote native, as she said when describing the Minnesotans who were afraid of the burgeoning Somali population. She used the word native. Oh, but it doesn't end there. Michele Bachmann then went into a whole diatribe about Mohammad Noor's quote-unquote culture. You see, it's that oppressive black Muslim culture. Bachmann insinuated that Officer Noor shot and killed Justine Damond because she was standing out in the open in her pajamas. And you know, those Muslims with their culture don't like to see women uncovered like that. Bachmann went so far as to question whether or not the investigation would look into quote-unquote cultural questions, like whether or not Officer Noor shot Justine Damond because she represented quote-unquote Western civilization, which is a code for white when used in this context. When have you ever heard a right-winger make those claims against a cop? You see, some of them can't hold back. Their hatred for Islam, blackness, and immigration can't all just sit there and marinate together like that inside their heads, because one of them will crack and expose all of them and their bigoted double standards for what they really are. The person who exposed herself this time just so happened to be Michele Bachmann. How long before more cracks begin to show, I wonder? Let me make myself clear. I want to see justice in this case just as I do in all other cases involving black people. You see, unlike the right-wing trolls that flood social media with apologetic arguments for the murder of black people, I don't want to see innocent white people killed, and I damn sure don't want to apologize for it just because the ASRV in this case happens to be black and Muslim. However, pay very close attention to how differently people act when talking and writing about this particular shooting. How Justine Damond's life is romanticized compared to the lives of more melanated Americans whose lives are criminalized. It's been all too easy for the media to control the narrative. Well, not anymore. This should also be a wake-up call to all state violence deniers that it can happen to anybody. Even the Justine Damonds of America. Don't think that the police state that you so willingly help prop up won't one day target you. The training needs to change, yes, but there also needs to be accountability measures in place when even better training doesn't prevent unnecessary deaths. I don't know that there is better training to teach these ASRVs not to plant evidence by a dead body, the way Michael Slager planted a gun next to the body of Walter Scott after shooting him in the back. That seems like common sense to me. I don't know that better training will stop the flood of military weapons and equipment to local police departments via the Pentagon's 1033 program, which is now being expanded to include the quote-unquote war on immigrants at the border. Will better training prevent prosecutors from using grand juries to have secret one-sided trials to prevent an ASRV from being charged with murder? Better training is a start. It is by no means the sum total of the radical reformations that we should be demanding and calling for right now. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Also check out my blog at www.blackandintellectual.com.